way of introduction, my name is Daniel Jocelyn Simitowski. I'm the director of the Center for Christian Jewish Learning and the Kraft Family Professor here at Boston College. And I'm pleased to welcome you all to our lunchtime discussion and webinar featuring Dr. Dror Bondi, our corporate visiting professor in Christian Jewish Relations for this year. So please let me introduce him. Dr. Dror Bondi is Senior Research Fellow and Lecturer at the Schechter Institute in Israel, and the 2025-26 Corporate Visiting Chair in Christian Jewish Relations here at BC. He completed his PhD and MA in Jewish Philosophy at Bar Ilan University. He's an author, editor, and translator of several of Abraham Joshua Heschel's books in Hebrew. Dr. Bondi's book, Aetate, is about Heschel's thought and earned him the 2006 Shalem Prize. And in 2019, his edition of Heschel's groundbreaking Torah Min HaShemayim, or Torah from Heaven, based on newly discovered manuscripts, introduced critical new insights to Heschel's thought, and won the Mifal HaPais Prize, which is how I first learned of Dr. Bondi. So we're very lucky to have Dror with us here at Boston College for this year. And today he'll be speaking concerning his research topic for the year, which is further expanding into the work of Heschel. And his talk is on, is God religious? Great question. The significance of Abraham Joshua Heschel for interreligious relations. And at the conclusion of his talk, we'll take questions from the audience and also from members who are here with us on the webinar. And webinar members, you can type in questions into the comment field at any point. And I'll field those later. And for our new arrivals, welcome. You get to go to the front.
Oh,
good. Grab some first.
Good.
Glad to have you here. So, Dr. Bondi, I'm going to start sharing your screen now if you want.
Hello. Don't help them. Thank you very much for appointing me at the 2025-2026 program of visiting professor in Christian Jewish Relations. I'm profoundly grateful for this opportunity, and I'm deeply conscious of the significant responsibility it entails. It is a distinct privilege to engage in research and teaching on the thought of Abraham Joshua Heschel here this year, particularly as we approach 60th anniversary of Nostra Aetate. Heschel, prominent 20th century American Jewish thinker, was arguably the most influential Jewish voice in interfaith dialogue. As can be observed here,
There we go.
the living reality, Heschel's interfaith dialogue, is reflected in our time through the image presented here of Pope Francis receiving a photo. I have the honor of contributing to this field through my Hebrew translation and research in Heschel's work. This endeavor allows me to bring his interreligious thought, as well as his profound moral voice, to the state of Israel, a contribution that is particularly vital in these times. And I hope that thanks to your trust, I will also be able to contribute to facing the challenges of our time in the entire world. In 1951, moment. Ready? Here. In 1951, Reinhold Niebuhr, then America's highly influential Protestant theologian, predicted that Heschel would become a commanding and authoritative voice not only in the Jewish community, but in the religious life of America. This prediction indeed came to pass as evidenced by Heschel's close friendship and partnership with Reverend Martin Luther King Grown 1963 onward, and his leadership of an interreligious movement causing the Vietnam War. However, Heschel's initial significant public involvement was not centered on America and its social progress, but rather on dialogue with the Catholic Church. From May 1961, Heschel emerged as a principal Jewish leader participating in the process that led to the creation of Nostra Aetate, a declaration guided by the Jesuit Cardinal Augustin Bea. Heschel was first introduced to Cardinal Bea in Rome on November 26, 1961. Subsequently, in May 1962, he submitted a memorandum to Bea articulating the American Jewish Committee's position on improving Catholic Jewish relations. When they reconvened in New York City on April 1, 1963, Cardinal Bea emphasized his hope for the continued cooperation of Rabbi Heschel and members of the American Jewish Committee who have contributed so significantly thus far to removing the basis of misunderstanding between Catholics and Jews. On September 14, 1964, Heschel met with Pope Paul VI for a crucial conversation concerning the final formulation of Nostra Aetate, which was officially promulgated by the Pope on October 28 of that year at the end of the Second Vatican Council. This pivotal engagement laid the groundwork for further interfaith leadership in America. A year later, Heschel joined the faculty of the Union Theological Seminary as a visiting professor, thereby becoming the first non-Christian faculty member at this prominent Christian seminary. His inaugural lecture there was famously titled "No Religion is an Island," which he commenced with a personal reflection. I speak as a member of a congregation whose founder was Abraham, and the name of my rabbi is Moses. I speak as a person who was able to leave Warsaw, the city in which I was born, just 6 weeks before the disaster began. My destination was New York. It was been Auschwitz or Treblinka. I am a brown flag from the fire in which my people was burned to death. In this talk, I will address the main claims of Heschel's lecture. But first, let me also begin with a personal note. I grew up in a settlement in the Shomron, in a hardcore right-wing environment. I was educated to believe that God supposed Jewish supremacy, that the only way to worship the pure Jewish law in the land of Israel as an ethnic Jew. I was even taught that the English language itself takes one away from God. Only when I encountered Heschel, who his writings, my eyes were opened and I realized that the revelation of our days was given in English and in America. Heschel freed my soul from the prison of my neo-religious and national identity by teaching me the perspective of God, who creates all human beings in his likeness. Moreover, Heschel helped me see the challenge of living out one's identity and tradition as a continuous interpretation of the moral demand of the universal. In what follows, I will present key aspects of Heschel's life and the foundational ideas that he taught, subsequently showing how his unique approach to interfaith dialogue is rooted in the very core of his standing before God. Indeed, in the broader studies that I intend to pursue this year, I will argue that Heschel's interfaith thought is not an incidental aspect of his Depth-Theology, rather, it lies at its very heart and illuminates its other dimensions. Heschel was born into a Hasidic dynasty which profoundly shaped his early understanding of living in the presence of God. Nevertheless, He chose not to adopt the Hasidic tradition of inheriting his father's rabbinic position, opting instead to pursue philosophical studies in Berlin. However, when he observed liberal democracy alarming descent into fascism, he actively sought an intellectual alternative for the Western world. Consequently, he dedicated his PhD dissertation, The Prophetic Consciousness, to a phenomenological understanding of prophecy, viewing it as an intellectual and spiritual journey to the land of the ancient biblical prophets. Mere 6 weeks before the outbreak of World War II, Heschel managed to escape Europe for the United States. Following nearly 3 decades of prolific spiritual writing and significant moral involvement, he was famously described by Martin Luther King Jr. as a prophet. Heschel is a truly great prophet, forever seeking to make the great ethical insights of our Judeo-Christian heritage relevant in this day and in this age, always standing with prophetic insights to guide us through these difficult days. But how did Heschel understand prophecy? Let's begin with his PhD dissertation. How did Heschel dare to approach prophetic consciousness? In his introduction to its English version, which he published in 1962 as The Prophets, and aims soon to publish its Hebrew translation, he explains that the prophets themselves changed his method. In his doctoral research, Heschel employed a purely phenomenological method. He suspended all judgments, including the question of whether prophecy is a true experience before God, in order to gain insight into prophetic consciousness. Yet, is prophetic consciousness merely another phenomenon? Heschel indeed confesses that during his phenomenological inquiry into the prophets, they seemingly, and I quote, came back to life, compelling him to respond to his own experience to theirs. They didn't merely speak about God, rather, they felt God's pathos and responded with their own profound sympathy. Consequently, the prophet's sympathy with God's pathos demanded that Heschel respond with his own sympathy in order to truly comprehend it. As an analogy, when someone tells you, I love you, the only way to genuinely comprehend the meaning of these words is through mutual love. While one is not obligated to reciprocate such a saying if genuine affection is absent, the specific meaning of the phrase cannot be fully understood without a sympathetic response. Similarly, thus said the Lord is not merely a claim of authority. Rather, through these words, the prophets assert that we can understand their message and encounter God through the wilderness. From this perspective, piety transcends mere obedience to an ultimate other, and religion ceases to be solely an objective reflection of an ultimate object. The prophets bore witness to God's turning toward humanity, and through their words, we can encounter Him as an ultimate subject in His interpersonal turning toward us, and suddenly all the world is seen different. Every time we experience wonder at our very being, at the miracle of every flower, we understand our existence as God's gift, as His demand to find our meaningful destiny. Every time we experience deep fellowship with another human being, with every kind of human suffering, we feel how God's parenthood has opened our hearts to relate to one another as siblings. Heschel dedicated his thought to invite us to such moments of experience. His philosophy is promise. His theology is theophany. Pious people who read Heschel will deepen their relationship with God, with God's creation, and with all God's children, and even and especially if these children of God live and believe in other religion. This leads us directly to the central question concerning interfaith engagement. How does such religious experience create this paradigm of interfaith dialogue? Let us turn to Heschel's words in his lecture, No Religion as an Island, specifically to his main paragraphs that directly describe this relation. On what basis do we, people of different religious commitments, meet one another? First and foremost, we meet as human beings who have so much in common: the heart, face, the voice, the presence of a soul, fears, hope, the ability to trust, capacity for compassion and understanding, the kinship of being human. My first task in every encounter is to comprehend the person of the human being I face, to sense the kinship of being human, solidarity of being. At this point, it is crucial to note that Heschel doesn't call for an encounter between two faiths, each absorbed in its own particularity. Rather, he calls for the meeting of siblings, standing together under the caring love of their common father. This perspective shifts the focus of interfaith dialogue from the negotiation of differences to the shared experience of God's universal parent. Heschel deepens this vision in the following passage, where he describes the profound spiritual challenge and sanctity inherent in every encounter with another human being. To meet a human being is a major challenge to mind and heart. I must recall what I normally forget. A person is not just a specimen of the species called Homo sapiens. He is all of humanity in one. And whenever one man is harmed, we are all injured. The human is a disclosure of the divine, and all men are one in God's care for men. Many things on earth are precious, some are holy. Humanity is holy of holiest. To meet a human being is an opportunity to sense the image of God, the presence of God. According to rabbinical interpretation, the Lord said to Moses, "Wherever you see the trace of man, of every human being, there I stand before you." This passage demonstrates that for Heschel, interfaith dialogue doesn't begin with theology, but with the recognition of human solidarity as the image of God. Heschel then addresses the core dilemma of interreligious difference within this framework of shared humanity. When engaged in a conversation with a person of different religious commitment, I discover that we disagree in matters sacred to us. Does the image of God I face disappear? Does God cease to stand before me? Does the difference in commitment destroy the kinship of being human? Does the fact that we differ in our conceptions of God cancel what we have in common, the image of God? Heschel's response to these profound questions centers on God's perspective, which resides precisely here. As every encounter with another human being offers an opportunity to perceive through God's eyes. Just as the book of Genesis recognized God's image in every human being, and just as the prophet Amos perceived God's justice in history, so too did my grandma experience God in her kitchen through her acts of kindness toward all. Furthermore, this is an experience accessible to every human being, transcends mere social affiliation with a religion. One can even be secular. Standing before God is not exclusively a religious experience, which is limited to those fluent in the language of faith about God, and certainly not to the ritual of any particular religion. It is fundamentally a human experience. Crucially, one needs only to remember that one's religious tradition is not ultimate. To be vigilant against idolizing one's religion, to recall that God is not religious. This understanding of God's non-religious character and universal perspective was deeply rooted in Heschel's engagement with the existential threats of his time. Following the personal opening of his lecture, Heschel emphasized that this understanding held significant relevance for his contemporary era. Nazism, in its very roots, was a rebellion against the Bible, against the God of Abraham. Realizing that it was Christianity that implanted attachment to the God of Abraham and involvement with the Hebrew Bible in the hearts of Western men, Nazism resolved that it must both exterminate the Jews and eliminate Christianity. Nazism has suffered a defeat, but the process of eliminating the Bible from the consciousness of the Western world goes on. It is on the issue of saving the radiance of the Hebrew Bible in the minds that Jews and Christians are called upon to work together. None of us can do it alone. Both of us must realize that in our age, anti-Semitism is anti-Christianity, and that anti-Christianity is anti-Semitism. This urgent call for cooperation stems from a shared recognition of the ultimate spiritual challenge. Is Judaism, is Christianity ready to face the challenge? The supreme issue is today not the halakha for the Jew or the church for the Christian, but the premise underlying both religions, namely whether there is a pathos, a divine reality concerned with the destiny of man, which mysteriously impinges upon history. The supreme issue is whether we are alive or dead to the challenge and the expectation of the living God. This represents a unique interpretation of Nazism as an anti-God movement, as idolatrous religion. While the Nazis overtly claimed to hate Jews due to a purported racial inferiority, Heschel understood this hatred to be fundamentally rooted in animosity toward what Jews represent, the faith in one God, which stands as the very antithesis of Christ. This perspective illuminates how Judaism and Christianity are profoundly aligned. The primary battle is not waged between diverse religions, but rather between fascism, or indeed any form of religious hatred, and the one and only God of all humanity. Only when religious people lose sight of God, they succumb to fundamentalism. Similarly, only when we permit fascists to commandeer our religions and transform them into idolatries, do we regress into paganism. Conversely, it is only through standing before God that we can, and indeed must, be led to peace. In 1957, Heschel published an article in which he excerpted a single paragraph from the manuscript of the prophets to articulate a radical assertion. Egypt and Assyria were locked in deadly wars. Hating each other, they were both the enemies of Israel. How does Isaiah, the son of a people which cherished the privilege of being called by the Lord my people, the work of my hands, feel about Egypt and Assyria? In that day, Israel shall be held with Egypt and Assyria, a blessing in the midst of the earth, which the Lord of hosts has blessed, saying, Blessed be my people, Egypt, and Assyria the work of my hands, and Israel my inheritance. Our God is also the God of our enemies. The enmity between the nations will turn to friendship. They will live together when they will worship together. All three will be equally God's chosen people. Isaiah knew that God's love for Israel, like every true love, is not a mere selection of the best objects, as Philip Cunningham mentioned yesterday. In a moment of love, one transcends oneself toward one's partner, not because of merits or functions. Love is not an instrumentalization. It happens as a mutual response. A chosen people is not a fact, but a relationship. And such a relationship can happen and will happen in that day to all nations. You know, religion is an island. Heschel states that the very act of true interfaith is evidence that both religions worship God. We shouldn't forget our commitments to meet each other. Vice versa, we should come from the deepest place of our faith. The first and most important prerequisite of interfaith is faith. It is only out of the depth of involvement in the underlying drama that began with Abraham that we can help one another toward an understanding our situation. Interfaith must come out of depth, not out of a void absence of faith. It is not an enterprise for those who are half-learned or spiritually immature. Course session continues. We should be careful that interfaith dialogue will not become a new religion. At a time of paucity of faith, interfaith may become a substitute faith, suppressing authenticity for the sake of compromise. In a world of conformity, religions can easily be leveled down to the lowest common denominator. Both communication and separation are necessary. We must preserve our individuality as well as foster care for one another, reverence, understanding, cooperation. The problem to be faced is how to combine loyalty to one's own tradition with reverence for different traditions. How is mutual esteem between Christian and Jew possible? Heschel's answer is humility. Indeed, as human beings, we will always live in a tradition within our interpretations of God's will. However, we must remember that our tradition is not perfect. It is but our relationship with God. Hate begins when one identifies his or her specific tradition with the one God, or in Heschel's words, religion is a means, not the end. It becomes idolatrous when regarded as an end in itself. Over and above all being stands the creator and Lord of history. He who transcends all. To equate religion and God is idolatry. History is full of religious wars. History is not full of religious wars, but of idolatrous wars. Only when idolize our religion, identifying it with God as if it is the one and only way of standing before God, do we commit the sin of dehumanization and forget God's perspective that every human being was created in his image. In his speech, Religion or Race, which he delivered in Chicago in 1963 during his first meeting with Martin Luther King Jr., Heschel explained that faith and racism are absolute are absolute opposites. We can hear its opening in his voice. And I did. This is not Heschel's voice, this is my voice.
Well, with the Lord that I should heed his voice and let Israel go. I do not know the Lord, I will not let Israel go. The outcome of that summit meeting has not come to an end. The Pharaoh is not ready to capitulate. The Exodus began, that is far from having been completed. In fact, it was easier for the children of Israel to cross the Red Sea than for a Negro to cross university.
In this powerful segment, Heschel not only invokes Moses and King cry of "Let my people go," but also directly connects it to the educational struggle for liberation, illustrating how oppression continues to manifest at the gates of university. This resistance to equality for Heschel stems from a distorted understanding of God. He explains, what is an idol? Any God who is mine but not yours, any God concerned with me but not with you, is an idol. Faith in God is not simply an afterlife insurance policy. Racial or religious bigotry must be recognized for what it is, blasphemy. God is every man's pedigree. He is either the father of all men or of no man. The image of God is either in every man or of no man. Human being, of course. The parenthood of God is the source of interfaith dialogue between siblings, and at the same time, it is the source for the moral line, the paganism of anti-solidarity, of racial or religious bigotry, is blasphemy against the parenthood of God. This profound concept of God's universal parenthood is further elaborated by Heschel in Our Religion is an Island, directly addressing the relationship between diverse traditions. Above all, while dogmas and forms of worship are divergent, God is the same. There are levels of existence where Jews and Christians meet as sons and brothers, sisters. All men are sons of one father, but they have also the power to forfeit their birthright, to turn rebels, voluntary bastards. It is not flesh and blood, but honor and obedience that save the right of sonship. We claim brotherhood by being subject to his commandments. We are sons when we hearken to the Father, when we praise and honor him. Instead of focusing on theological distinctions regarding divine sonship, Heschel called us to feel, through our shared Depth-Theology, the undivided love of our Father, which is the source of our deep sibling and solidarity. For Heschel, interfaith dialogue was never a marginal issue, but lay at the very heart of his Depth-Theology. To stand before the one God is already to stand together as siblings within the light of the one parent. Against the idolatry of absolutizing one's own tradition or nation, such an encounter becomes nothing less than a call to faith itself. Faith in the living God and in the possibility of meeting one another in His presence. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that presentation. Really great way of learning about what you're up to, and a really nice summary of Heschel's thought needs to be all of this. So really appreciate that. So the floor is open for questions from people who are gathered in the room, or also participants online. Participants online, enter guests, please. Oh, and then can you give your name? Just introduce yourself to your.
My name is Matilda Breitner, retired faculty member from Romance Languages. Just actually a point of information. In the last slide, you showed us this famous statue of synagogue and holy church side by side instead of synagogue, bowed head and so forth. And would you remind us of where and when that statue was erected?
I don't remember, but I'm sure that people here know. Philip Cunningham mentioned it yesterday, but I don't remember.
Yeah, so Professor Philip Cunningham, who was the founding director of our Center for Christian Jewish Learning here at Boston College, when he went to St. Joseph's University in Philadelphia, he took over the Institute for Catholic Jewish Relations there. And one of the projects he undertook was to commission this sculpture, which reverses the historic Christian anti-Jewish iconography of synagogue being defeated and church being victorious, and now it's an image of mutuality. So that's on the main campus. I don't know, have you seen it in person, Matilda?
I haven't seen that, but as a medievalist, I have had much to do with the more traditional representations of synagogue,
Yeah.
uncrowned brow, broken staff,
Yeah.
and the triumph of Holy Church. So it's, I think, very significant to see that represented in a
Yes.
new way.
Yes, I believe Pope Francis was there for the dedication.
He dedicated in 2015.
Yeah.
So, yes, some other questions.
Very much. That was a helpful introduction. I wonder if,
Just say.
oh, Catherine Cornell. I wonder if you can say something about whether Heschel gave any evidence of integrating elements from other religions that he had engaged with in his dialogues. I mean, you presented a very nice kind of theology that forms a basis for interreligious dialogue, but what was dialogue for him? Was it mutual, was it cooperation, or did he also engage in more theological dialogue where you can see evidence that he learned something from religions that he was engaged in?
Let me give you an example. Heschel wrote his famous book, The Prophets, published in 1960. With a lot of quotes in the Bible. Can you think what was the translations that we chose of this quote? Until then, in his previous books, he used the JPS, the Jewish translation, but in the Prophets, he changed his way, and he used the RSV as his basic translation. It enables him to. It was not an easy choice, right? Because in the introduction of the JPS, they said Jews shouldn't use Christian translations because there are Christological insights in the translation. Jews should use their own translation, but Heschel wanted to meet the Christian audience in America, and his choice put him in a cross, double meaning, because in every verse he had to decide if to receive the Christian insights of interpretation or his Jewish tradition. It is very interesting to examine this translation as a kind of neutral reading of the Hebrew Bible by the Christian translation and his own background. So we published an article about this. I make examination of all the codes, and it's very interesting to see when he received knowledge from the Christian translation, especially because of the use of this translation with the non-Masorti translation, ancient of the Bible, instead of the Jewish Masorati version. And when he can't accept the Christological understanding, and he brought his background from the rabbinical literature and from even Hasidic literature into his interpretation. And it was very interesting that sometimes he rejected both translations and created his own translation, maybe as a kind of point of meeting between both translations.
Interesting. What about in his relationships with Niebuhr, the King, and so on? Do you see traces of any of their thought in his?
Of course. I will speak about, maybe this is my plan to speak in my next public lecture here about Heschel and Martin Luther King. Susanna Heschel already wrote an article about the mutual influence between them. Heschel himself wrote an article about Reed and Niebuhr and what he perceived and what the disputes between them. He was very close friend of Niebuhr and of MLK, and but he had also a dialogue with Muslims. We have no record of this meeting that he had in the end of his life, and of course, as you see here, is the
Tishna Khan.
yes, he made a huge speech against the war in Vietnam, and in this speech he spoke about Buddhism as the source for peace with Vietnam.
I have a question here from online that I'm going to read for us. So the civil rights movement allowed Heschel to live out his own faith commitment solidarity with Christians. Is there a similar context today where Jews and Christians can meet in a deep way? So this is a question of application. Where would you, if the civil rights movement is where King and Heschel encounter each other, where are the contexts which Jews and Christians today might, around what social issues might they encounter each other? And that would also be an occasion for moving into this depth of theological engagement as well.
One of the crucial questions today for the Jews is what is our most deep identity? And for a lot of Jews, in my opinion, unfortunately, the basic identity is national and not religious. So from this point of view, the very relationship between Jews and Christians can remind us, the Jews, that our basic identity is covenant and not national. That our national aspect is but an aspect of the covenant with the universal. This is from Jewish perspective, in my opinion. But as I said in my speech, in my talk, for Heschel, interfaith dialogue is a kind of a test if your own religion is idolatrous or not. So it is very important for every religious person to to be in a interreligious dialogue, interfaith dialogue, because this is a very important act of faith itself. So this is for everyone. This is a question for the Catholics. What you need today in order to deepen your faith by interfaith dialogue?
Yeah, certainly seems to this question. Nationalism is a question that Christians are also needing to grapple with today as well. And to what degree did Heschel talk about covenantal identity as a point of meeting between Christians and Jews? I can't recall hearing a lot about that in your talk per se.
I don't think that he talked about a lot about this, but he didn't mention this term, but he spoke about the share of God. So, and the relationship between religious people and God. So maybe this is his term for.
Thank you.
If I understand here, Heschel, he's sort of putting these two poles, two extremes out there. On the one extreme, he claims if you look at religious specificity too much, you'll end up in the realm of idolatry, in terms of putting up your religion as idolatry. And so that's not a point in which interfaith dialogue can happen. On the other hand, there was this interesting quote about that interfaith dialogue, almost on the other extreme here, that interfaith dialogue shouldn't just be boiled down to the common denominator. So it's essentially like you shouldn't just focus on erasing all differences. And so I'm just trying to grapple with that idea about what interfaith dialogue really means for him, because it does kind of come off that way in terms of the way that some of the things that are talked about between Christians and Jews. We share God. It just sounds almost like bland. And I'm wondering if you can kind of tease out some of those moments where interfaith dialogue kind of does recognize differences and is okay with that, or I don't know if you kind of expand on that.
Religion is a language, but God is not a word. For Heschel, there is depth-theology. And in the sphere of depth-theology, all humanity only can stand in fear and trembling and try to experience God's perspective. But then we should remember that we are human, and in order to explain ourselves, the experience, we should use theology, and theology is a part of a tradition. So this is the tension here, the truthful tension between the experience, the religious experience itself, God turning to us, and our response. And maybe we can speak about love in the same way. Can you imagine marriage without love? So you can't bring flowers to your wife if you don't love her, right? The challenge is the experience. However, you don't take the garbage out every day or every 2 days, the love will not be enough, right? So, but if someone has an allergy to flowers, you shouldn't bring flowers in a basket, right? Every couple should find their own language to express love, which is much deeper than any language. So, in this sense, Heschel called us to meet in interfaith dialogue in the deepest level, and then we can speak about how I translate it into my language, I translate it into your language, and to learn from each other the deepest experience that is beyond any expressions.
So, yes.
Thank you so much for a lovely lecture. I had an original question, but with the responses you actually gave in some of the previous questions, I'll just change it a little bit. Because you said that Heschel did not appeal so much to covenantal theology in his interreligious dialogue. And I'm assuming because perhaps in the Jewish tradition, the concept of the Abrahamic covenant and the idea of chosenness may have caused a certain barrier. But could we take it a step further, perhaps, like the first biblical covenant is actually not the Abrahamic covenant, it's the covenant with Noah, which shows, as you said, this shared divine and shared God amongst all humanity. So do you think we could perhaps appeal to that?
Yes, his quote, his interpretation of Isaiah 19, I think maybe he didn't say as a covenant, but he said much more radical, saying other chosen people, other chosen peoples, right? So this is very interesting because chosen people means that there is God and the humanity, not like in a specific tradition, even nationality. But yes, this is not the concept of one universal world without differences, but only siblinghood, in which every one of us remembers that his or her covenant is only one way, as Philip Campbell said yesterday, of standing before God, of expressing our understanding and our changing understanding. Covenant, our words for our covenant yesterday is not our words for our covenant tomorrow. Nostra Aetate is the unbelievable change in the history of the Catholic Church, right? But it is the same covenant. With other words, with new understanding.
We have time perhaps for one more question, if anyone would like to pose another question. Ruth, please.
Just pick up on that a little bit further into something which has been part of Catholic discourse in the last, 20 years or so. Which is the question, does God have just one covenant with all of humanity? Or are there different covenants with different communities? And how does that fit into this discussion?
I think it was a dispute between the prophets themselves. Yes, there are prophets. I think maybe Isaiah the second speak more about one covenant for all humanity. Of course, not the new one, but the old one. But
The original.
yes, thank you. But there are prophets like Isaiah 19, the first Isaiah, and you can see it also by the prophets who used the image of parent and children. So even if Israel is the oldest son, the same parent can have more children, and prophets who used the image of marriage, which is much more complicated, especially for Catholics, but also for human beings. Yes, love is unbelievable experience, but when I love someone, we have face-to-face meeting, and I can't be in love with someone else, right? So the image of marriage is more exclusive, I think. So there are prophets that we can think about how they lead to one covenant for all humanity, and prophets, yes, one marriage, and prophets that prefer the image of siblings, which maybe lead to several covenants.
That's great. A really useful place to stop and perhaps indicates.
May I add
so-
one more comment?
How's that, right?
Heschel showed that this was also a rabbinical dispute between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Ishmael. While Rabbi Akiva preferred the image of marriage, and that's why he spoke only, maybe even we can find in his sayings, racial sayings. Rabbi Ishmael was more universal and preferred the image of children and partner. Thank you.
So which is from Torah and Shemayim.
Yes.
The new edition of Heavenly Torah that you did. So that gives a sense of the depth of Heschel's thinking that is still to be explored. So I think this is a really rich preview of the various things Dr. Bondi is going to bring it with us this academic year. As a preview, he's giving a public lecture on January 27th at 5 p.m. To more fully lay out some of the thinking he's developed this year, so people can attend that either in person or online again. So Dror, this is really wonderful, and thank you so much.